Hi, my name is Chauncey Smith, and I'm the Senior Manager of Reimagining Justice and Safety at Catalyst, California, an organization that dismantles racial injustice and redesigns public systems for access and equity. We do this by shifting and building power with movement leaders and communities of color. I have two questions for you. Have you ever wondered why the number of fatal car accidents continues to rise year after year in California, even though we annually spend billions of dollars on police and sheriffs? And second, how about the fact that officers are far more likely to stop people of color for traffic violations, even though research shows that they are no more likely to violate traffic laws than white people? We live with these troubling outcomes because our approach to traffic safety is broken. But at Catalyst, California, we're partnering with organizations like the California Black Power Network to fix this through innovative research, power building, and advocacy. One of the primary traffic safety problems we're trying to fix is the devastating law enforcement practice known as pretextual traffic stops. So what is a pretextual traffic stop? Well, it occurs when an officer has a hunch that a person may be connected to a serious crime. And then they identify a minor vehicle code infraction, such as a broken taillight or outdated tags, hence the pretext, as a reason to stop the person. And after stopping the person, they search them for evidence of more serious criminal activity. So this is essentially the flip side of the same coin as racial profiling. All too often, that initial hunch gives rise to a stop that is based on implicit or other biases. Using data reported pursuant to the Racial Identity Profiling Act, Catalyst California conducted an in-depth analysis of law enforcement patrol activities in California. We did so through a sample of 4 sheriff's departments: Los Angeles, Riverside, Sacramento, and San Diego. Collectively, these agencies account for nearly 20% of the state's officers and have jurisdiction over counties that represent 44% of the state's population. We found that, while there are some variations across jurisdictions, there's 3 key takeaways. First, agencies are largely dedicated to conducting pretextual traffic stops that undermine safety. Second, these stops have a devastating impact on communities of color. And third, they result in billions of dollars being wasted annually. For generations, many people have accepted the idea that public funds spent on law enforcement keep us safe. In theory, officers fight crime and respond to calls for help when emergencies arise. This approach holds that law enforcement is the primary, if not sole, solution to protecting community members from heinous interpersonal harms, like homicides, robberies, or aggravated assaults. It's based on at least 2 key presumptions. One, that law enforcement agencies significantly focus their efforts on responding to calls for help from community members. And second, that their actions are an effective means of advancing safety. So, with this in mind, we analyzed data from the Racial Identity Profiling Act and other sources to see how things actually play out. So, as an example of the first inquiry, that is, whether officers are responding to community concerns, we looked at the amount of time officers spend conducting officer-initiated stops versus stops that are based on calls for service, i.e. requests for help from community members. And here, as you can see on the slide, there's 2 examples, one from the LA Sheriff's Department and the second from Riverside Sheriff's Department. For both, the data show that nearly 9 out of 10 hours spent on stops are for officer-initiated stops as opposed to responding to calls for service from community members. Within officer-initiated stops, we drilled down to look at the reason people were being stopped. Here, you can see 2 examples of what's going on. Officers are primarily stopping people for traffic issues. To be specific, in the LA and Riverside Sheriff's Departments, approximately 8 out of every 10 hours spent on officer-initiated stops are for traffic violations. When these traffic stops occur, an equipment or non-moving violation is often identified as a pretextual basis for the stop. Here, you can see that in Sacramento County, just over 2/3, or 68%, of time spent on traffic violations was for equipment and non-moving violations, and about 1/3, or 31.5%, was for moving violations. Another indication of pretext is when stops result in a warning or no action. This suggests that there may not have been a legitimate safety risk, and the stop arose based on a hunch. Now here, the bar graph shows the percentage of stops that result in a warning or no action based on alleged traffic violations, reasonable suspicion, or consensual encounter and search. Looking at the bar at the top, stops for traffic issues, you can see that approximately 3 out of every 4 hours, or 74.8%, are spent on stops that result in a warning or no action. Thus, the data show that law enforcement patrol activities are largely dedicated to pretextual stops for minor traffic issues that pose relatively low safety risks, rather than responding to community concerns about serious crimes. With this in mind, Kristen Nimmers from the California Black Power Network will walk through how these activities impact communities of color.
Hi, my name is Kristen Nimmers. I am the Policy and Campaign Manager with the California Black Power Network. We are a coalition of Black-led and Black-serving organizations working together to dismantle anti-Black racism and improve the lived conditions of Black communities through civic engagement, power building, and policy advocacy. This issue is significant for our organizations and for Black communities generally because pretextual stops aren't just inefficient uses of time and resources, often amounting to no improvement in public safety, but they are also disproportionately harmful to communities of color and have devastating impacts on our lives. Earlier this year, the RIPA Board released an annual report showing that all communities of color experience stops at higher rates than white residents. Comparing residential and population data, they found that Black and Latinx individuals represented a higher proportion of stopped individuals than their relative proportion of the weighted California residential population. You can see that Black residents experience pretextual stops at a rate of more than double the population, and Latinx residents experience pretextual stops at a rate almost 10 points higher than their population. This graph is based on statewide figures from all law enforcement agencies reporting uses of force to the State Department of Justice. The uses of force analyzed here include incidents involving the discharge of a firearm or force resulting in serious bodily injury or death. Data shows that officers use force against Black Californians at a rate of 5.1 per 100,000 Black people. This represents an annual average of 140 people injured or killed between 2015 and 2019. Black people are the most likely to be subject to uses of force among all racial and ethnic groups, and the rate for Black people is 17 times higher than the group with the lowest rate and 2.4 times higher than the group with the second highest rate. These gaps illustrate the disproportionate impact of racist policing on Black people. Some of the harms caused during these stops include physical harm, dehumanization, degradation of public health, fees and fines, as well as the devaluation of life. Countless lawsuits, bystander videos, and media coverage have repeatedly shown the reality of the devastation and physical violence inflicted on people of color through uses of force. It is these incidents and more that have led to global protests, civil uprisings, and transformative movements throughout California. Consistent devastation and cruelty inflicted on a mass of people also results in a broader harm to our community and society through the dehumanization and devaluation of life. The consistent subjugation of people of color to unnecessary stops, violence, and death sends a message that we are less than human and can be subjected to harm without repercussion. The stops that resulted in the unnecessary and premature deaths of George Floyd, Sandra Bland, Oscar Grant, Philando Castile, Tyree Nichols, and countless others shows that too often law enforcement serves as a judge, jury, and executioner when it comes to deciding whether a person of color is guilty of a crime. The persistence of this brutality indicates that from a systemic perspective, the value of their lives is viewed as less significant than white individuals in our society. Even for those who are fortunate to walk away from a traffic stop without experiencing deadly force, broadly, this experience with law enforcement also negatively impacts the long-term psychological and physical health of communities of color, causing many to experience PTSD and fear of law enforcement. For example, police presence around hospitals has been found to discourage system-impacted men of color from visiting them. There is also a disproportionate financial burden placed on communities of color who are subjected to tickets for minor offenses that they cannot afford to pay. A base fine for speeding can amount to $100, and hundreds more may be added to that penalty to fund a variety of government services and projects. In the current economic climate, where 2 out of every 3 people can't afford to cover a $400 emergency, a significant fine can have a devastating impact on their ability to keep their license from being suspended, as well as their overall financial stability. It is important that we continue the work to address these racially biased harms. To address these issues, the California Black Power Network is working to transform our criminal justice system to one that is rooted in restoration, that recognizes the humanity and dignity of Black people, and is accountable for its treatment of communities of color. We intend to do this through the decriminalization of offenses that are the product of socioeconomic inequities or do not advance public safety, including the reform of traffic safety laws. Reform of significantly harsh and disparate prosecution and sentencing practices, and advocating for more intentional budgeting and spending in our communities to address the needs of communities living in poverty and impacted by systemic racism.
Now, having walked through the prevalence of pretextual stops and the harms they produce, a key issue is what their impact is on traffic safety and public budgets. Here, the key takeaway is that research shows that law enforcement stops are not improving roadway safety and that tremendous public dollars are being wasted on patrol activities. Here, on this slide, you can see that traffic fatality trends indicate that roadway safety is not substantially improving. For example, data from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration provides the number of traffic fatalities in California from 2011 to 2020. And despite enormous growth in law enforcement budgets over time, data on safety outcomes shows that things are getting worse, increasing from over 2,800 fatalities in 2011 to over 3,800 in 2020, with a high of 3,884 in 2017. Now, to put that in context, a Boeing 747 carries about 300 passengers. So this would be the equivalent of about 12 747 flights crashing in California annually. With that in mind, in 2021, the first nationwide study on the relationship between police traffic stops to motor vehicle deaths was published. It looked at state patrol stops for 33 states, including California, between 2007 and 2016. Notably, it found that police traffic stops do not reduce motor vehicle collision-related fatalities. To combine, here is a chart showing the growth in spending on law enforcement in California over time. You can see that figures have rose from about $5.7 billion statewide in 1980 to over $18 billion in 2016. And more recent figures show that California's 58 counties and 482 cities annually spend over $25 billion on law enforcement, compared to only $3.7 billion on public health. Counties spend more general fund revenue on sheriff's departments than on social services by a wide margin, and for cities, they spend nearly 3 times more on police than on housing and community development. On this chart, you can see how much LA County spends on its sheriff's department. Here, you can see that billions of LA County dollars are being spent on law enforcement patrol, the portion of the sheriff's department responsible for pretextual traffic stops. Along the same line, in Sacramento County, the total county budget is $4.3 billion. Amongst that, nearly $350 million goes to the sheriff's department, and over $180 million is for the patrol unit specifically. This amounts to 53% of the sheriff's department budget. Now, what are we doing about this? Catalyst California and the California Black Power Network are collaborating to build power and working to change public systems to end pretextual traffic stops across the state. Catalyst California is co-convening the Push LA Coalition. Push LA stands for Promoting Unity, Safety, and Health in Los Angeles. Since 2019, Push LA has worked to end the LAPD's use of pretextual traffic stops to profile low-income communities of color. The coalition also aims to ensure that public dollars spent on safety are used resourcefully by addressing the root causes of traffic safety risks and supporting community needs. Thank you for watching this presentation on how to reimagine traffic safety in California. If you'd like to learn more about our work or support our efforts to advance equity and justice, please feel free to reach out. I can be reached at csmith@catalystcalifornia.org, and you can also reach Kristen at knimmers@blackpowernetwork.org.